Hello all, welcome back. In this video, we are going to look at Azure files, and this is the third lesson in this module. If we look at the overview of this module, we will look at Azure files and the difference between files versus blobs, and we will look at how to create a share and how to mount it across Windows and Linux, and few options available with Azure files, and we will see a demonstration as well. If we talk about Azure files, those are managed file servers on the cloud, and this is accessed by SMB 3.0 protocol. So if we look at the scenarios in which we want to use Azure files, first might be, let's say we have some on-prem file server, and if we want add more capacity, in that case we can create Azure file share in the cloud, and we can extend those capability on the cloud as well. So it helps in supplementing those on-prem capabilities, or in scenarios like lift and shift where some application needs to use file server and we don't need to build the entire file server on cloud. In that case, we can just create Azure files, and the application can use Azure files and store the files in the file server. The third scenario might be, let's say we have multiple file servers, and if we want to sync the files across the file servers, we can use some of the capabilities of Azure files called Azure File Sync. And the next scenario might be, we might be having a shared application or the multiple copies of the application which uses same configuration files, and every instance reads that configuration files from the single directory. In that case, we can store all the configuration files in a Azure file, and all the application instance can read it. And next scenarios might be using it to store diagnostic data across instances. Let's say if we have multiple instances running, we can write the entire log file in a single file share, and we can use that for processing. And the final scenario is, we might have multiple servers on the cloud, and we might need to access some of the internal tools and utilities. So we can use Azure files to store it, and we can mount the same drive across all the cloud instances, and we will be able to access those tools. So if we look at the differences between the files and the Azure blobs, the first is the way of access. Say for example, Azure files can be accessed via SMB interface, and we can use both REST API and client libraries like .NET SDKs as well. And if you look at Azure blobs, it's only accessed through client libraries and through REST interface. And second approach, or the scenario which we want to use Azure files, is basically a shared drive, and the scenarios which we have discussed in the previous slide, like lift and shift, or storing common tools, etc. And for Azure blobs, so if we want to store files or videos and pictures, PDF, and if we want to expose it through internet, we can use it. Or even if we don't want to expose it to internet, but if we want to store massive scale of blobs, then we can use it. So When we talk about creation of file shares, we can use any of the Azure administrative interfaces, either it be Azure portal or PowerShell or CLI or any of the SDKs like .NET, Java, etc. So in Azure portal, we can go to files, and under that we can create a file share. And as we discussed in the previous video, there is no specific limitation on the volume of or the number of file shares which we can create in a storage account. And each file share might be a fixed size, but we can create multiple file shares as well. So if we look at the PowerShell, we can create a new storage account, and under that storage account we need to use new storage share commandlet. Once we have created an Azure file, we can access it through SMB protocol. So in this case, we can directly mount that in a Windows VM. So for that, we need to use net use command, and we will be able to mount the drive as drive Z or some other drive letters as well. So we might need to use full UNC path when we are mapping those drives, and we can use user account name and the storage key. One thing we need to make sure is that Azure files use port 445. So this port needs to be allowed from the VM. Some organization might specify this as a security issue, and in that case there is an additional capability called Azure File Sync, which works through port 443. So that can be used in some scenarios where organizations doesn't allow port 445. So coming to usage of Azure files in Linux, we need to use sysutils package to mount the drives, and not every OS support mounting those files. Say for example, modern OS like Red Hat 7 and latest versions support mounting of CIFS drive. But whereas if we look at Red Hat 6 and older versions, it might not have the capability to mount SMB 2.1 drives or SMB 3.0 and above drives. So we need to make sure whether the OS supports mounting the CIFS package, and we need to provide the directory permissions and the file permissions as well when we are mounting the storage or the share. So the command which you are seeing in the slide, right, mount -t-cifs, and the endpoint and other options which we have provided, just mount the drive as a temporary mount point, and once the OS is restarted, those mount will go away. So if we want to make it persistent, we need to add entry in etcfs tab, so that even after the restart, the files will be auto mounted. So one thing to note that is, you must have noticed when we are creating a storage account, there was an option under the advanced settings called secure transfer required. And if we enable that option, it will only allow HTTPS endpoint for Azure blobs. Also, in case of Azure files, if we have enabled this option for the storage account, it will by default block mounting the drives via SMB 2.1, because by default SMB 2.1 doesn't support encryption, so it will block by default. And for SMB 3.0 and above, if we are mounting it unencrypted, it won't work. So we can only mount SMB 3 and above with encryption. So this is one of the security measures which organization follow, and we can enable that settings during the creation of storage account, either in portal or PowerShell or any other interface. So one of the attractive capability with Azure Files is snapshot. The way snapshot works is that it captures the state of the share at the point of time, and it is a read-only copy. So we can take the snapshot of the entire share as well, and while retrieval, we can even retrieve at the individual file level as well. And the good part here is that we can take incremental snapshots. In this case, we don't really need to copy everything again. So whatever the delta files are there, then we can just take those copy of the delta files only. And some of the uses of the snapshot is that, let's say for example, if there is an application corruption or the error, and if you want to go back to particular instance of time, this capability will be much more helpful. Or in case there is some deletion happened, and if you want to revert that, we can do that, or for general backup purposes as well. But make sure you know that whenever we are taking the snapshot, that storage will be part of the storage account. So if we have 1 terabyte of the files, and if you are taking the snapshots, so the snapshot will be 1 terabyte and the actual files will be 1 terabyte. So in total, terabyte space will be used by Azure storage. Now we will look at a demonstration of how to create a file share and how to upload a file, and how to create a snapshot. So we will look at PowerShell experience as well. Now we are looking at Azure portal, and I'll click on the storage account which we have created previously, and the overview section we will be able to see the different services. There is a files service listed. I can click on it and I can go through it directly, or if I scroll the options a bit, I'll be able to see file service section, and under that there are files. Both will lead us to the same path. So once I click on that, so it will list the shares which we have already created. Since this is new storage account, there is nothing already available. So I click on file share, and I can provide a name. I call it portal-share, and here we need to define the quota. That is how much size is the share which we need to create. Let's say I'm providing 10 GB, and I click on create. So now the share has been successfully created, and if I go inside the share, I have few options available. I can upload the files, etc. So let's add some files here. I click on upload. And I choose a file to upload. Once I click on it, it will upload the file. So if you remember in the previous video, we have spoken about directoryless structure for Azure blobs, but whereas for Azure files, if you want to create some directory, we can create that as well. Now we have the data inside the share. We can create snapshot as well. So if I click on it, it will create a snapshot at this particular instant. And under the view snapshots, we will be able to see all those snapshots which have been created along with the timestamp. So we will be able to see what is inside this particular snapshot by clicking on those ones. So, and another thing to note is that there is a connect button available here, and if you click on that, you will be able to see the instructions for connecting this share from Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. So let's say for Windows, if I want to mount it as drive G, I can choose the drive G and I can execute this PowerShell commandlets to mount. Or if I want to use command prompt, I can use these commands as well. And for Linux, if we specify the mount point, we have the commands available, and if we execute those commands, it will mount in Linux. Similarly for Mac, we have those specific instructions. So now we will switch back to PowerShell and see how we can create a new share from the PowerShell. So now we are looking at PowerShell. So first thing is that we'll create a storage context from the storage account, and we'll use the commandlet called new az storage share, and we will create the share name called ps-share, and using this context we will create the share. So now the share creation is successful. We will be able to see the share in the Azure portal as well. So if we refresh, we have a new share called ps share as well. So now we will try to mount this share on a Windows virtual machine. So once I click on connect, let's say we mount it as Y drive. I'll copy the instructions and I'll use this to mount this particular share on a Windows VM. So now we are looking into an Azure virtual machine, and I have just opened PowerShell ISE under that, say that Azure virtual machines. So first I'll try to execute the command test connection, and it's validating whether the port 445 is open or not. and it's successful. And next, I'll add the credentials. And once the credential is added, I'll create a new drive called Y using those settings. Now the mounting has been successful and we should be able to see a new Y drive. So now the network share is visible. So this is the Y drive which we have mapped. So next thing we are going to look at is how to access the share from Storage Explorer as well. So currently I'm clicking on the storage account and there is a section called file shares, and under that I'll be able to see all the shares which we already have. So if I click on portal share, I'll be able to see the files. So here I have the option to upload, download and all the features which you are seeing from the Azure portal. So by various mechanism, either with SMB drive or from Azure portal or from the Storage Explorer, we have multiple ways to access the share and we can mount it to Windows and Linux as well. That's all for this video. Thank you.